Pacific's Test Kitchen. I'm Chef Wade, and today we are going to be cooking, or rather brewing, some beer today. So today we'll be using the Groen TDH 40 quart steam jacketed kettle today, and we're going to brew a little bit of beer. So what we're going to do is we're going to preheat the Groen kettle with about 6 gallons of water. So I'm just going to add in the 6th gallon, pour that in. And what we want to do is get that up to about 150 degrees, because what we're going to do after that is steep some grains. And then we'll go over everything that we're going to be putting in the beer today. So today we're making a Mexican lager. So today what we're going to be using is we have a Pilsen Light dry malt extract. We also have a little bit of light malt extract, which is in liquid form. We have our grains, which are Pils grains, and we have ground them up and milled them, and we are going to be putting them in a bag to steep. We also have 2 ounces of hops, which we will use. There's 1 ounce here and 1 ounce there. We're going to use 1 ounce in the beginning and then 1 ounce at the end. We also have right here our gypsum, which basically, if you're cooking, it's kind of a translation of the salt, so it's going to enhance the flavor of the beer. We also have our Irish moss, which is actually seaweed, and what that will do when we add that is that will keep the beer clear. Then we have our brewer's yeast, which they call this a smash pack for a reason. So what we want to do is we pulled this from the refrigerator. We want to, there's a bubble in there. We want to pop that and give that a shake. And then we're just going to leave that right on the counter during the brew process, and we're going to come back to that later when we're done chilling the beer and when we do what they call pitching the yeast, and then put it in our fermenter. And then also you want to have a calibrated thermometer. So what we want to do is we want to check the temperature of the water in the kettle, and we're shooting for 150 degrees. We are there at 153 degrees. So what we want to do is I've got a grain bag, which what this will do is just keep the grains from floating around throughout the beer. So we want to pour that into the bag. Then what I do is we want to just tie it up so those grains don't get out. And literally just drop it right into your water. And then also you would want to have a timer, because what we're going to do is we're going to steep those grains for 20 minutes. So we're going to set a timer and wait, and then we're going to come back and go to the next step. So now after 20 minutes of boiling our grains or steeping our grains at 150 degrees, now it's time to take our grain bag out of the kettle. It's very hot, so be careful. What you want to do is just want to let all that water kind of drain off the grains, all that starch. Then you can just place it right back on this pan, let that cool. Now, there are some recipes where people will take the grains out of this when they're making beer and use them for baking. So that's some kind of cool way to reuse something that you're using for something else. So we'll just set those aside. Now what we want to do is we want to add our extracts. So what we're going to do is put those in and make sure that those are dissolved completely, and then we will add our hops after it comes to a rolling boil. So what we'll do, we'll add our dried malt first. You can do it in any order. I'm just kind of grabbing it just because it's closest. Just want to add that in. And that's one of the great things about using the double jacketed kettle, is that we don't get any scorching and have to worry about scorching our grains or our malt extract. So this is where you're going to get a lot of the sugar content for your beer. Just pour that right in. Just stir. Want to make sure, and this is also going to add a lot of that really nice kind of amber color to your beer. And there are a lot of different malts depending on the type of beer that you're going to make. Each recipe will require a different malt or maybe a combination of one or two malts to get that characteristic of the beer that you're trying to duplicate. The water's nice and hot, so this liquid malt actually really incorporates rather quickly and dissolves very thoroughly. But you want to make sure you scrape out all your malt, don't want to waste any of it. Get the edges, get all that in there. And that's one thing about brewing like this is you want to make sure everything that you use, all of your utensils, your tongs, are all very thoroughly sanitized, because if you don't, you can ruin your beer. And that's kind of a bad thing. Don't want to do that. So what we're going to do now, we've got all of our malt in, we've got our grains that have already steeped, so a lot of those starches are now mixing with the sugars. And now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to crank this up to a rolling boil. So just going to turn it up a little bit, gauge it with a little bit of fire, and then when we come back, we'll start to add our hops and go to our next step. Alright, so now we've added our extract into the kettle. So we brought it to a nice rolling boil. So now what we want to do is we want to add our first part of the hops, which I'm going to do. Just going to dump that right in. Dump that in. And we're also going to want to add a teaspoon of gypsum at this point. So just add this right in like that. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to just stir that in. Just like so. We'll let that go. We're going to bring it now up to still a nice rolling boil. Doesn't have to be going crazy all over the place, just a nice steady boil. Then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set our timer for 45 minutes. So at 45 minutes, that's when we're going to add our Irish moss to clarify it. And then 10 minutes after that, so 55 minutes into the cook, then we're going to add our flavoring hops for the last 5 minutes of the boil. And then we'll proceed to cool the product down and put it into our first fermenter. Now 45 minutes have gone by, so now what we want to do is we want to add our Irish moss. So we're going to add 1 teaspoon to our beer right now. And that's going to help with it clarifying it. You don't need to worry about straining it out or anything. It will all sink to the bottom with the hops, and you'll see when we pour it out in about 15 more minutes what it will look like. So we'll add that right in. Give that a stir. And just continue to let the beer do its thing. Now we'll set our timer for another 10 minutes. Then we'll add our last bit of our flavoring hops. And then we'll be ready to pour it out. Now we're dumping in the last bit of the hops for flavoring. And we're going to let that go for about 5 minutes. And while we were waiting, we sanitized our bucket and our cooling stock pot. Made sure, once again, sanitizing everything before we make contact with the beer, have it ready. So now we'll wait another 5 minutes and then we'll pour this off. All right, now we're ready to pour off the beer. I've got a stock pot down here which we're going to then take the stock pot and immerse it into an ice bath to bring the beer down to between 70 and 80 degrees. Once we achieve that temperature, then we're going to add it to our fermenter, our first fermentation bucket with the yeast, and then we're going to put the lid on that and put a backflow preventer on it so the carbon dioxide can go out but no oxygen can come into the beer, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So let's go ahead and pour this off. One of the things that I really like about brewing beer in the Groen kettle is I can tilt it and pour it off. So as you will see, once I pour off a lot of the beer, a lot of the hops and a lot of the other ingredients that I have in the beer just kind of stay to the bottom. So I can actually start clarifying the beer right now. So just pour this off. You want to be very careful. Do it very slow. And what we want to do is pour that beer off into our pot that we're going to chill. So far, nice color, really nice smell. You can really pick up the hops. Just kind of gradually keep pouring that down. It's okay to get some sediment or some of the hops in there, because once we chill it, we're going to pour it off again. And then once it goes into the second fermenter, we're going to siphon it off. So we're going to pull it off. So a lot of the sediment's going to be at the bottom. So we can really control pulling the beer out. It takes a little bit longer, but you end up with a little bit clearer of a beer. That's kind of what we like around here. You don't really have to get it all out of there. It's just more of a visual thing. If you have too much, especially with the pellet hops, it can tend to make your beer kind of cloudy, and then you'll have sediment in your bottles. And we found that we kind of like not having that. So once again, it's just your choice. Getting down to the bottom here, so I'm going a little slower, because what I'm trying to do is pull off most of the beer and leave a lot of the sludge, so to speak, in the bottom of the kettle. And we'll just pour that off and dump that down the drain. And then we'll clean and sanitize our kettle after. So we're pouring that off. And we're just about there. Want to get a shot at the bottom of the barrel as we... So we want to leave that. We've already poured off pretty much all the beer we can. There's a little bit there. So you can just get that. Like I said, a little bit's no big deal, but all that doesn't need to go in because it's already done its job and been incorporated into the beer and all the flavors. So we don't need all those spent hops. So what we'll do now is let this cool off, turn it off, come back to clean that in a few minutes. I'll take this pot in the back, put it in the sink with a bunch of ice, cool it down, and then we'll go to our next step. And now, we let our beer cool down in our ice bath until we got down to 76 degrees, which is in that window of 75 and 80. So we're ready to go and do what they call pitching the yeast. So we take our smash pack of yeast, it's ready to go, it's already started to activate. All we want to do is we just want to open up the pouch. We want to pour in the yeast into our bucket. And then what we're going to do, make sure you get all that in there. Just like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our beer that we've cooled down, we're going to add that to our yeast. Got about 6 gallons here. Pour all that in. Then what we want to do is give it a nice stir. Really make sure that yeast is incorporated with our wort. Get a little bit of foam, that's okay. Now we've got that yeast thoroughly mixed in there. And we want to make sure that we sanitized our bucket as well and all the parts, including the lid. Sanitize that. We want to put that on there. Make sure that's on there nice and tight. Snap it on. Then what we want to do is kind of a backflow preventer. So what this does is this keeps, as the yeast and the gases on the inside of the beer, as those are releasing, it will release those, but no oxygen will go in this and affect your beer. So what you want to do, just twist that right into the top. There's a little hole there. Take a little bit of fresh water here. Just pour that into the fill line, which is right about there. And we put on our cap. Now we're good to go for another 10 to 14 days. We'll just leave it just like this at room temperature, about 65 to 70 degrees. Let it do its thing. Then we will transfer it to the second fermentation after about 10 to 14 days. We'll leave it in there for about 10 to 14 days, and then we'll go to bottling. Hello, this is Chef Wade, and we have been waiting about 13 days for our beer to go into the second fermenter. So I'm going to show you basically what that's all about. So first we have our bucket with our beer in it, the first fermenter. We're done with that, so we can take the airlock off. And what we can do is we can open it up. Be careful, don't try to do it too fast. Don't want to spill it. We'll just pop the lid off. That's our beer after the first fermentation cycle. So it smells fantastic. So all the yeast has been in there and created the alcohol, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to put it into our second fermentation container. So what I did was I sanitized all the hoses, the plunger, everything that's going to touch beer, and we want to make sure that we only pull off the beer itself. There's going to be a lot of solids in the bottom and yeast, and we do not want that to go into our second fermenter. Just helps with the clarity of the beer, and I just don't like that stuff in there. So what I do is I'll put this about halfway down on the side of the bucket, and then I'll just start pumping it. And once you get it kind of started to siphon, it'll pretty much fill itself. So as it does that, it's already pulling, and it does take quite a few minutes for it to fill. As you can see, there's no bubbles in the line, so there's no water or no oxygen in the line. So now it's getting a good siphon, starting to fill on the bottom there. Nice color Mexican lager we're going to be making here. But what we'll do is we'll fill this up, and we will put another stopper on there with another air gap regulator, and then we'll let it go another 10 days until we achieve the gravity that we want, or the alcohol that we want, and then we will go next to bottling. Alright, so now we've pulled all of our beer from the first fermentation container to the second. Now we're just going to put a stopper on the carboy, which is the second fermentation. We're going to leave that for about 10 days. So then what we're going to do is going to add our airflow valve here. We're just going to fill it up just to that line. And what we're going to do is we're going to pop this right in. There's a little hole, so that way carbon dioxide can go out, but the oxygen can't go in. Then we cap it, leave that for another 10 to 13 days, and then we will start the bottling process. So hi, this is Wade back at the Pro Pacific Test Kitchen, and today we're going to bottle our beer that we have brewed, put into a first fermenter, and then a second fermenter, and now it's getting ready to bottle. So the first thing I do is make sure that I sanitize all of the bottling equipment that comes in contact with the beer. And with that, obviously, comes the bottles. You want to make sure they're all sanitized. Even though they're clean, you get them clean, there's a lot of dust and things on them, and you really want to make sure that you sanitize them properly and then air dry. Also, our mixing spoon here, we want to make sure that this gets properly sanitized. Then also our bottling equipment, which is right here. We have our bottler, then we have our suction here, which we're actually going to draw the beer up into and siphon that. So let's get started. So the first thing, after you sanitize everything and let it air dry, then you want to take your priming sugar, which this is just pure cane sugar. It's about 3/4 cups or 5 ounces. And so what I do is I put that into a little microwavable container like this, almost make like a simple syrup. Just add it with water because you want to make sure it's completely dissolved. So we just want to dump that right into our bucket like that. Make sure you get it all in there. Now we want to come over to our beer. We want to remove the gap and the airlock. Don't need that anymore. Now what you want to do with this is there still may be some extra sediment on the bottom of the bottle. So what we want to do is we just want to pour that relatively slowly and try not to stir up all that sediment. That way it doesn't get into the bottom of the beer bottles. So what we do is just gently kind of lift it up like this. Just kind of rest the neck of that right on the bucket. Just let it gently pour right into our nice sanitized bucket with our priming sugar. So it goes pretty fast. Wish you could smell this. It smells great. I think this could be a great batch. So as you can see, kind of on the bottom of the carboy there's some residual. And that's where, by siphoning the beer from not only the time that you're cooling the beer into the first fermenter, but I also siphon it a second time into the second fermenter, and that will help get a lot of any hops or yeast or anything else that's still left in the bottom, and that'll give you a nice clear beer. So that's really all I had. So really by siphoning it takes a little bit longer, but I found that I get a far better product. So alright, so now after we've poured off that beer into our priming sugar, you want to really make sure that you stir and incorporate that sugar into the beer and make sure it's not all at the bottom or the top, because what you want to do is you want to make sure your beer is nice and evenly carbonated. So you don't want some where the caps are blowing off and some that aren't carbonated at all. So we've been mixing this for a few minutes now. It's starting to look good. That way. So now we will add our bottler right into the bottle. Thank you, sir. And you just hold that down, and then you add your plunger right into the beer, and then now you start to siphon off that beer until you create that suction, get all the air bubbles out, and you fill the container. You can see the beer starting to pull. Just like that. Create suction, start to fill up the bottle. What I do is I tend to stop it like right when it gets up to the top of the bottle. And sometimes it's easier when you have the beer up higher than you do the bottles. It goes a little bit faster. Got just a few more. There we go. Go ahead and pull that out. Just take that out. Now what we want to do is we want to cap the beer. Just put the cap right on it, just like that. Take the capper, goes right over the top, just like that. And now you have to wait about 10 days. Then you can try it, see how you like it. And after that, you want to make sure you drink it about 6 months. Could go up to a year, but usually about 6 months. Enjoy. Hi, this is Chef Wade. We are at our last step of the Pro Pacifico ale that we made. So this is the hardest part, is having to taste the final product. So we got some really nice labels made up from Carmen Chamberlain here, and we're gonna crack this and try it out. Definitely carbonated. Carbonation looks right. Put a little fresh lime in there. Now this, like I said in past videos, is what I tried to do is make kind of a combination of Corona and Dos Equis. So a little lime in the Mexican style lager. Drop that in, give it a taste. Cheers. Well, we won't be dumping that batch out, that's for sure. Another successful batch. Here's to you.